We return to today's Electoral College results. As we showed you earlier in the show, the many Americans who are far from ready to accept them.
The votes are 10 votes, Donald J. Trump.
That was a scene repeated in several state capitals around the country. Joining me now is my Boston Public Radio co-host, Margery Eagan. I have no idea if she's moving on. Along with Michael Jeffries, is sociologist and professor at Wellesley College. Pleasure to meet you, Michael. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, I'm not saying there's not reason for concern, but I have to say I'm amazed that 5 weeks in, so many people are still curled up in a ball over this thing. Are you surprised or no?
I'm really not, because
Why?
I think we have to understand the legitimate trauma that this election was for so many people. It impacted different people differently. I think in particular people who were already vulnerable, people who had experience with sexual assault or harassment, people who are Muslim. This election meant something different, and they felt it differently. So we have to be careful about urging those kinds of folks to move on when it's a legitimately hurtful and traumatic experience.
Can I quote her, if you don't mind?
Sure.
She said on the radio today, and I'm paraphrasing, tell me if I'm wrong. We had a woman, remember the woman who called us, we just met her Friday, right after the election? She self-identified as a Muslim, immigrant, black physician.
Yes.
And she said, I'm scared. That I get. What Margery said on the radio today is we're middle income, we're middle class white people. Why are we curled? I don't mean we, but the generic we. Why are we curled up in a ball?
Yeah, well, I can't answer on behalf of middle-class white people, obviously.
But no, in general.
But I think, there's actually a piece in the New York Times about this. And in addition to the individual trauma that some people are experiencing, there's a sociologist called Neil Gross who writes about this as collective trauma, where so many of the assumptions that we had about democracy, about what it meant to have free speech, about free and fair elections, those things are being called into questions, and it's dangerous.
If you you were open about your concerns, to say the least, about Trump during the election.
Yes, I was.
So have you come out of this, or where are you?
Well, because of what I do every day, I can't feel traumatized every day because I can't take a news diet or stop reading the news and stuff like that. And I've also been around for a while, but I think for young people, white, black, whatever they are, I think they saw the world moving in the trajectory they were hoping it was going to move in. I mean, they were pretty little when Barack Obama was elected the president. I think this is true of my children, who were obviously white kids.
Continuation of that.
Yeah, they saw, gay, straight, Muslim, black, white, and then all of a sudden, the world that they learned about has turned upside down. And it's kind of like, it reminds you a little bit of a bad breakup. You have this terrible traumatic breakup, and you wake up in the morning, and for a second everything's fine, then this blanket comes over your head again. And I think for people, it's hard.
Have you seen it in the real world? I know we hear it on the radio. Have you seen it in your life? I mean, have you?
I've seen it from my children and their friends who expected something different.
Here's my thesis, that it's a little bit about Trump. It's a lot about, in some people, particularly the white middle-income people, is that we have contempt. We believe that they are the deplorables, is we bought into the... And so it's sort of, how can those people who are not smart enough, not educated, how can they decide who the next president is instead of upper middle income white? Is there some truth in that?
Yeah, I understand the resentment thesis, and I also think what we've seen over the course of the election season, at least, was a violation of moral norms, right? I mean, things were said during this campaign that should not and cannot be said by someone with that much power, because it changes the way people behave. And we saw it in the uptick in hate crimes, right? So we need to understand that this shift is a dramatic shift. The contrast with the previous president is a dramatic contrast, and the stakes are high.
But, when you mention hate crimes, what a Trump supporter sitting here would say, there was one that was allegedly committed on your campus that wasn't, as we learned, by 2 Babson students. So there's some of that that's a little overblown, too, potentially. So do you have a cure for this ailment, the legitimate ailment that some people... What do you do? How do you...
You know more about this than I do, but I think you have to do something. You just can't be...
What does that mean?
Well,
go to the
get
march
active.
on the 21st?
Go to the march on the 21st. There's a march in Boston. Or give money to organizations that fight for the causes you believe in. Or get active in some way. That's one of the things I think is neat about this election, that people that have been sitting on the sidelines, this big wake-up call. So, do something.
Yeah, but wait a second. I mean, we heard right after the election that all these women's groups were saying, now we finally have a wake-up call. Hillary Clinton was not the wake-up call for women. The first woman president of the United States couldn't motivate them, but the loss by the first woman president could?
Well, but Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton had very similar policies. It wasn't kind of the same thing, you know what I mean?
I do know. So what's your cure? Do you have a cure for people?
I actually agree. I think doing something is the right way to go, and we've got to reconceptualize what it means to be a citizen. I think too often we think about citizenship as something that you have, a kind of set of rights you possess, but citizenship is about action, it's about participation,
Yeah.
right? So supporting organizations like the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, that's one form of action. Going to your Board of Education meetings, right? That's another form of action. Getting involved at the local level and staying involved. This requires a new commitment to public and civic
Is having an
life.
open mind and saying this guy was elected president of the United States and maybe I'm going to try to find areas of where I can support what he does, or is the antipathy so deep that you got to go the direction you guys are
We
talking?
should never say never, and I think we should welcome all strategies. There are some people who believe they can have those conversations and bridge those gaps, whether it's in their place of worship or whether it's in their families or wherever it might be, and others who just are not there yet and don't feel capable of bridging that divide. And both
right.
are okay, but everybody has work to do.
Feel better?
I'm rethinking my elitist stances on things. This Christmas, instead of the white lights, I've gone for full-colored lights, because I think that's less elitist than my little sparkly white
Are
ones.
you hopeful about this? We only have 30 seconds. Are you I mean, Bush v. Gore, I think people got over more easily than they're getting over this, even though we're only 5 weeks in. Are you optimistic? Or
I don't want to get over it. I mean, I'm optimistic that this country can change and that the next results of the election or the next election will be different. But I don't think getting over it is the way we want to think about this. I think, again, we need to redouble our commitment to our morals and the principles of democracy.
Pleasure. Marjorie, see you tomorrow morning.
tomorrow.
Michael, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for your time.